James, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started? And I'll give you some time to put the link up if you'd like to find the link.
Thank you, Tom. And do you think you could just message that link to me that I could see it? But yeah, so my name is James Goetz, and I've been doing working as a scholar, independent scholar. I first published in 2012, and your recruiter saw my article on my cosmological argument, and yeah, I'm real excited to share about this. But I've got to publish a biblical resource book and 4 peer review articles, and 2 of them in the journal Theology and Science, and they both relate to my model of semi-classical theism. And the second paper, includes my semi-classical cosmological argument.
Cool. So I posted the link to your blog in the description for anybody looking, and I sent you the YouTube link in LinkedIn.
Okay.
And so the cosmological arguments for the existence of God, I imagine that's typically what it's used for.
Yeah.
I am an atheist, so I don't think there's any evidence or reasons to believe in a God. Could you give us a presentation of your cosmological version and why you think it indicates the existence of a God?
Yes. Okay. So I look at an argument first for presentism. And that there is an actual passage of time, that is real, as opposed to eternalism, which would say that, everything has always existed, and, there's no real passage of time that we perceive. And from that, we can see that it is impossible for there to be an infinite passage of time intervals. And given, quantum mechanics, we know that, that there's no infinite divisibility, but there is, actual time intervals, often referred to as Planck times, as the smallest possible unit of time. Sometimes there's a little bit of discussion whether it can really be that small or, a little bit, longer than that. And so there really has to be an origin of time, of tense time, I would say, because I believe there's always been tenseless time where, an eternity, and there was an entity that went and created the beginning of tense time. And so a very like a bridge from tenseless eternity to the beginning of the passage of time, and that entity we would refer to as God. And now I would say that I don't hold to all the traditional concepts. I don't agree with the traditional view of divine omnipotence. I don't believe that God can just meticulously control the universe. So nonetheless, there's a supreme being who's always existed and put the physical universe, started things off.
So the first few things was I don't see any problem with infinite pasts, tensed or untensed, like tensed being sequential orders of time versus untensed being like B theory of time. I don't see a problem. I think there's models of both that are past eternal, and those models are both better supported than saying that there was a creator of any kind. So like the models in physics, both the tensed past eternal ones and the untensed ones are both better models of reality than a God in any way. So why posit an extra entity there that doesn't have any like discovered versus asserted properties? All the properties in God are asserted properties. All the properties in physics are discovered properties. So it seems like it's better to go with the discovered tensed and tensed theories rather than posit a God at all.
Well, I mean, now you say that as far as having a past infinite passage of time is well attested to, and that is actually not the case. If it is an actual logical impossibility. If, for example, let's take a look at the future from any starting point of time, and we'll assume that it would endure forever, potential eternity, potential infinity, which that is, that's a process, not an actual number. Now, no matter how far we go into the future, from any starting point, there will always be a finite age. There will never be, an infinite age going on. It's something that an infinite passage of time, of tense time, is not logically possible.
Wait, what's the problem there? So, like, if it, like there's an infinite amount of something already existing, if it takes, like if it had already existed for eternity, there would already be an infinite, even though the series was continuing. So, like an object in motion remains in motion. If you just imagine it in motion forever, there's no logical contradiction there. So, I'm not seeing the logical contradiction with a tense past eternity.
So, well, there is. I didn't quite follow exactly everything that you said, but as far as the passage of time, an infinite number of a series, a tense series, that is not logically possible.
So that seems false. So like if I start at 0 and start counting up, obviously that no matter at any point in time, there's going to be a finite amount.
Yes.
But if I start at infinity and count up, it's still going to be infinity. So if all time had already existed and was already past eternal and tensed and was just continuing this internal sequence, there's no contradiction there. So I don't see the problem.
Well, so if a past infinite passage of tense time was indeed possible, then what you're saying is correct. That it would just continue. But as far as establishing that that is a logical possibility in the first place, that there already has been a past infinite passage of time, that is, that you haven't shown to be logically possible.
Well, there's no logical contradiction with the past infinite set of time, therefore it's logically possible.
Wait, could you repeat that again, please?
There's no logical contradiction with an infinite past set of periods of time. Therefore, there's no logical contradiction.
No, that for any infinite passage of time, that is logically impossible.
What is the
Now,
logical contradiction? What is the P and not P in that statement? Because I've actually had this conversation regarding William Lane Craig's arguments, and even he admits there's no logical contradiction. Aristotle admits there's no logical contradiction. Every academic admits there's no logical contradiction. The Reaper paradox isn't a logical contradiction. It's an intuitive contradiction. All of the academics I've talked to on this say there's no logical contradiction. So I'm completely lost when you say there's a logical contradiction in that statement, because saying there is a past infinite set of points in time doesn't entail a P and not P anywhere in that claim.
okay, well, well, first of all, if eternalism were true, then a past infinite set of time intervals is okay. That's not logically impossible, but it's the passage, it's the infinite passage of time that is not logically possible. Now, excuse me a moment. And I want to illustrate how from any starting point, they would never reach an infinite passage of time for any potential infinity, any type of process of time intervals that would last forever with no end. There, an infinite passage of time would never occur. Now, if it's something that has always existed without cause, then, and then there's no real tense time, it's kind of more of an illusionary thing. Everything we perceive as passage of time is not, real, like according to how eternalists position, state it. But as far as, you know, again, they're really from a starting point. I'm specifically saying an infinite passage of time. I'm not merely talking about an infinite number of time intervals.
But I don't see a contradiction with there being an infinite number of time intervals and a present moment. So there can be a present moment and an infinite past, and there's no logical contradiction there either. So if you think the present moment must have had a beginning point, then obviously that would have a finite number to it. But it could also just be infinite in the past. Like there's no need for the present moment to have begun. It could also have been infinite, just like time was infinite.
Now, I still haven't seen anything that you said that would indicate for an actual infinite passage of time. We're not just talking about a mere infinite number of time intervals without any real passage of time. But I don't see anything, anything that you're saying, um, that supports that.
There's no logical contradiction with an infinite passage of time. That's the argument.
Okay. Well, that's a statement.
So the statement, there was an infinite passage of time, entails no P and not P. Therefore, there is no logical contradiction.
Okay. Now, however, I illustrated very early on that from any starting point,
But I'm saying there's no starting point. That's the point. It's like
I
you can have.
understand there's right. So I'm clearly saying though that there is no infinite, regardless of whether or not it's a past infinite passage of time, or in any case, there's no logical possibility for an infinite passage of time. And the best illustration is to see that a never-ending passage of time with the beginning would never reach infinity.
If you didn't start at infinity, if it started at infinity, it would reach infinity because it started at infinity.
And how does something start at infinity? Infinity isn't even a natural number. It's a set.
Yeah, it's a set that is uncountable set or whatever. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, if it starts that way, if it was already existing in that state, that would be how it doesn't like have a beginning. It's always been that way.
Okay, well, natural numbers and rational numbers are a countable set of infinity, but if you start at the beginning, you would never complete it. It would all have to happen at once. It's the real set of numbers that's not a countable set, and that's the infinite set. That's
Alpha, no, I'm familiar, but what saying that the present moment has always been in existence and has always been in motion means it starts at infinity and adds one each time. There's no logical contradiction there, and so there can be an infinite set of past previous moments that have just always existed as part of eternity, and there's no logical contradiction there. You don't need a beginning to it. Like there's like you're gonna make it a circle. Say if imagine a circle and there's two points of time, just 1 and 0. And that's literally it. There's nothing else. Kind of like B theory, you have slices and there are just two of them. It can just keep going in that circle forever, and there's no logical contradiction there. And so that there's no reason to say that there couldn't have been an infinite set of past eternal states of time. Like that was a lot of the big theories were that where you could just imagine the planets going around forever. It's not really there's no logical contradiction there.
well, I mean, as you say, it can work certainly with B theory or eternalism. I guess I don't really see. I'm not really seeing that we're going to get past this point. I mean, that makes
Well, that's fair. We can grant it for the sake of the argument. I don't think it's relevant to the God claim.
Mhm.
So, what's the next part? What's the next part of the argument? So, even if we grant there
Yes,
has to be a beginning,
yes. So then there would have to be an entity, creating this, the beginning. And then now all these models of cosmology that claim a universe out of nothing, they ultimately start with some unstable, what's often called quantum foam or space-time foam. And that is ultimately something that has always been unstable in the infinite past. So that would not, so any model that involves, um, an unstable infinite past, that does not work with um, the the impossibility for an infinite passage of time. And so there has to be at least some entity um, with tenseless eternity. No, you know, they did not have any, this entity did not involve having, um, passage of time, any type of intervals, who would then bridge and start off the process, which typically involves quantum mechanics. And I believe the best theory for that would be starting off with a quantum vacuum with 0 point energy, and then heating that up to the highest temperature possible, which is called quantum temperature. And then from there, pretty much however the Big Bang cosmology would look like. And then there's kind of differences about how the first millionth of a second looked like in that model. And so I couldn't really, go over all that. But so whether it was this universe, whether there are multiple universes similar, there was ultimately a beginning point of creation of the physical universe. And
sure, but that could just be a quantum field. You don't need a God for that.
okay, now I did say though that it could not be a quantum field, because a quantum field would have to have an infinite passage of time.
No, it
That
doesn't.
was
It can be
something.
outside of time. It can be space and time can be emergent from quantum fields, so they can just be outside of time altogether.
Now, quantum fields, they require space. They're not independent of space and time.
Just the current models we have. You can just posit there's one outside of space time, just like you do for a God. Just making stuff up. If you make stuff up in a religious context, we can make stuff up in a physical context as well.
Well, so if you want to make up, the physical concept of a quantum field that has no quantum mechanics, they don't have any quantum activity. There's nothing. Well, first of all, they say it's unstable. But so if you want to say that something has been completely stable in eternity past, and then generated a universe, I mean, um, if you want to posit that, you know, uh, I, I could. I don't think that has much validity, but if you want to posit something completely new in quantum mechanics, um,
Like you were doing with a God. Yes, I agree it's silly, but it's more plausible to say that there is a quantum field outside of space-time, which is not necessarily eternal. It's outside of space-time. It sans space and time altogether. That's more plausible than saying there's a mind that did it. Minds are very complex things. They only exist in space-time. We have no evidence they don't exist. They exist in any other way. It requires a brain, as far as we can tell. So to say that there is some kind of conscious entity that made a choice, and all choices are a result of physical states, would be kind of like saying there's a magical pineapple that exists outside and created the universe. It's equally as implausible. But saying that there's a quantum field, which is the thing that we have the most evidence of being the most base thing in the universe, essentially, or energy of some kind, those are much more plausible explanations even if we have to say that there's some new part of physics we don't understand yet, which is perfectly reasonable. That is a much better explanation than positing a mind or a consciousness of any kind to do the work.
Well, I mean, proposing a quantum field, well, I mean, a field does imply space, but but implying a quantum system, um, I mean that is a hypothetical possibility. Um, I don't I don't think it's in line at all with physics. Um, as far with quantum mechanics, I don't think it would come remotely close to anything in quantum mechanics. But if you want to pull that hypothetical example, then yeah, I mean,
Well, I'd still say it'd be closer to quantum mechanics than God would be. So the criterion here isn't that it's in line with current models of physics. The criterion is it closer to be in line with current physics than positing an God being of some kind, which I think, yes, I think pretty much every physicist is going to agree consciousness is a product of brains. Positing any kind of consciousness outside of brains is unsupported. Saying that there's a new feature of quantum fields, perfectly rational. Yeah, there's stuff we don't know about quantum mechanics. That's perfectly reasonable. So if we're not asking the question, is it in line with current quantum mechanics? We're asking the question, which is closer to modern physics, this hypothesis or the God hypothesis? And I think mine is infinitely
mhm.
closer.
And one thing though, what I do want to understand is what is your understanding of the God hypothesis? Because, the understanding of God, that is, there's different understandings.
Well,
So
so
how do you,
just to jump in, so I think the minimum requirement here is that there has to be some kind of a choice, and that choice is a separate kind of a causal entity than deterministic or indeterministic forces in the universe. And I think the classical argument is that the beginning of everything or time had to be done by this choice thingy, whatever it is.
hmm
And that seems to be, I'm using consciousness and choice here as sort of synonymous.
yeah,
It seems in my context that a choice is a form of consciousness, which is only in brains, which is only a product of neurology. And so to say that a choice could have caused this thing, or it's a new kind of causal entity in the universe that is outside of space time, is about as
hmm
reasonable for me as saying there's a pineapple that's outside of space and time. So I don't actually understand what that could be, but if we just granted it
hmm
for the sake of the argument, I'd say that positing such a third kind of causal entity is implausible from the field of quantum mechanics entirely. Like nobody thinks that's a thing in quantum mechanics, not even close. It's not even analogous to quantum mechanics. But saying that there's a new kind of field outside of space and time, that's actually a plausible thing that people talk about. People talk about past infinite tensed theories of time. That's a very possible thing that many physicists accept. And so these kinds of theories, while they are strange in many ways, and they do have to go beyond known physics, there's still much more in the realm of possibility than saying that there's a conscious choice causal thing that exists
hmm
out there.
All right. I mean, now it still hasn't even been proposed at all by, philosophers or physicists, philosophy of physics. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm not all ready. And as far as, um, the, the mind argument, I do know that everything we know about the mind, like all of our experiences, there's definitely evolutionary origins to every, thought process that we are aware of, that we can see. Now we don't know everything about consciousness. I mean, that's not something that's completely aware, but certainly I do agree with you that everything. I don't go into any type of um, discard, type of
Dualism.
dualism that doesn't. Well, I do believe in emergent dualism, um, but I don't believe in like this eternal, mind dualism, Cartesian dualism. I don't at all agree with that.
Property
Um,
versus substance.
yeah, um, but I still, even with that though, I don't believe it's, I do believe in the possibility of consciousness of a completely different type. And given that, the need for a beginning of eternity past, I do, that does look a lot more viable than the quantum mechanics theory that you're proposing. I can't absolutely disprove that at this point, but
Well, how is saying that there is an entirely new kind of consciousness that is a new kind of causal entity in the universe a more plausible explanation than saying there's a new kind of quantum field?
all right, well, quantum fields clearly require space. I mean, there's
Well, but
um,
minds clearly require space.
well, as far as all that we have. So
Right.
yeah,
But then I can go back and say quantum fields, as far as we know, require space.
yes, um, right. As far as um, definitely proving, you know, my view of an eternal consciousness versus your view of an eternal quantum space with
Quantum
an
field is
eternal
fine.
quantum field without uh, space. I mean, I think the word field does actually imply space. I think you would have to do something other than quantum field. Um,
Well,
but
right. It's just a generalization here. The core of my argument is that if you take any particular thing in our universe and you want to say, expand it out to some analogous property to
mhm,
say that it exists outside of space-time. You can take any property you want: pineapple, mind, apple, potato, field, star, anything you want. And you
mhm,
can assert that there is some unknown quality to this thing, that there is a analogous, spaceless, timeless version of it.
mhm,
And if we want to say, well, what is the most reasonable to accept this for? The most reasonable is going to be the one that is the closest to the fundamental nature of reality that we have, which is quantum fields or quantum stuff of some kind. And so to say that a mind has these properties would be like saying something that is a combination of quantum fields, which is creates physics, which creates chemistry, which creates biology, which
mhm,
creates brains, which creates consciousness. So it's a rather higher order emergent property, like a pineapple, which is also a combination of physics, chemistry, biology to make pineapples. To say that a mind is this, the more likely to have this new property outside of space-time, seems to be analogous to saying a pineapple is likely to have this new property that exists outside of space-time. Now, both pineapples and minds seem to require space and time and physics and
mhm,
chemistry and biology and all these other things. Quantum fields, no, I agree, their field implies space, but it doesn't require physics, it doesn't require chemistry, it doesn't require biology, it doesn't require brains. So it's a much simpler
mhm.
hypothesis to say this is the extension to what is the fundamental nature of reality that has some new property outside of space-time, rather than to say that there's some mind or pineapple that did so.
Um, yeah. So I mean, I can't absolutely um, go in and show, well, this new theory of um, quantum mechanics. Uh, that is you know a quantum system without space and time compared to a mind without space and time. Well, a mind without, well, we could say that without space but tenseless time I think, is more realistic than no time at all. Probably in either scenario of you know your quantum system versus a mind without, an uncreated mind without space. Um, so I would have to say that, yeah, I cannot absolutely, disprove, you know, your hypothesis here.
But why would you think that yours would be more plausible here? Because I think that there's an argument that positing higher order emergent properties to be the solution to the fundamental nature of reality is less plausible. So why, like, I think any argument that you apply to say brains could have this analogous consciousness thing outside of space time could be applied to any other property in the universe to say it has some analogous property of something that's outside of space-time.
All right.
So
Well,
why? Go ahead.
well, first of all, I'm not claiming that, the original mind of God is an emergent property. So, well, in fact, if I was proposing an emergent property, then that would actually totally defeat. That wouldn't even go along with my cosmological argument. We're talking about, an entity that has always existed without change.
Right. So I agree. I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
By emergent, I meant the known version of consciousness we have is emergent.
Yes.
And so if you're trying to say there is an analogous to the known version of consciousness, which is emergent, it seems like it's a stretch because it is
Hmm.
a composite. It requires lots of things, whereas it's
Hmm.
less of a stretch to say quantum fields or something. And any argument that you could say our minds may have some analogous non-spatial, temporal, or whatever property of
Hmm.
consciousness could be applied to the quantum fields or whatever and say, oh, it has some analogous something or another. So
Yeah.
using something we know of currently, the versions we know of which are emergent, and saying it's analogous seems less plausible than saying something more fundamental has some analogous thing that's fundamental.
Yeah.
So the emergent only applies to our known version of consciousness.
Yeah. So even, well, I would even admit that even though I believe in the emergence of consciousness, and we're not necessarily going to see it all in atoms, but I still believe it has some, you know, that did emerge from neurology and the exact existence of all this. I don't even think it's fully visible, and I mean neuroscience, kind of agrees with that. But yeah, that still would be something completely different than an uncaused, you know, uh, mind. And I, so I mean, you're bringing this up for the first time. I mean, I'm used to seeing all this arguments along the lines of quantum foam, or um, nothing, unstable nothingness is pretty much how Lawrence Krauss puts it. Um, and but that is not, literal nothingness. Um, and you know, as as far as um, yeah, I can't say I have a great argument against your hypothetical here.
Thank you. I appreciate the concession there. But I think like why think that their choices can be a third kind of causal entity in the universe at all?
Well, I imagine something about the bridge between tenseless eternity and tense time. Um, I guess everything that we know, um, anything we know in quantum, that requires something that has activity. So there has to be so um, and uh, uh, I I guess, well, from what you're describing and all that I've studied in the philosophy of physics, I mean, it just, it doesn't seem at all viable what you're saying. But um,
Well, just to clarify, thought your argument is that choices are this third kind of causal
yes,
thing, and so I'm asking you. I didn't make a claim there. I was just
yeah,
asking you why think that is a
okay. Well, I
thing.
guess okay. So yes, if it wasn't a choice, there would be something that had anything that has the most minute probability greater than zero, given an infinite passage of time, that will occur, and even occur an infinite amount of time. Um, so there had to be something other than random processes to get things going from tenseless eternity to the beginning of tense creation, whether it was the beginning of our observable universe, or if there's more out there. I definitely believe in, that multiple universes could exist and parallel. Not the many worlds model. I don't think that holds, any weight. Not that I could really go into that, but there could be independently created universes that would not interfere with them, because space and time, does come out of nothing, but there is a cause to that.
And why
And
think minds or
yeah,
causation is that cause? Why think they can even be outside of space and time?
well, it seems more, for me, it seems more viable um, of a mental causation, um, causing something to have an ultimate beginning, than anything we know in physics that, would have had to have existed forever. Like, for something, to have you know um, a quantum system apart from any passage of time, to suddenly start the passage of time, uh, if there was any slight probability of that happening, um, whatever the most minute, greater than zero, then that would have already occurred an infinite amount of times in the past. So it couldn't be something that was just random.
Well, so I think my argument is more that conscious choices seem to be under the same laws as everything else in physics, and so they're going to have to be either determined by reasons or causes in physics, or they're going to have to be underdetermined by randomness. But you seem to be saying it's a third kind of thing. It's not determined. It's not random. It's something else, and that's the part I'm
Well,
missing. I don't see why we should
actually,
think.
it would be I believe it would be determined, if I'm understanding what you mean by that. So yeah, consciousness, made a decision. It couldn't be something that randomly occurred, because if it did randomly occur, then there would already be an infinite passage of time, even if it's this, you know, along the lines of of certain models of multiple universes. I'm trying to think of that term right now. I don't know why it's slipping my mind. I've even written a little bit about it. Uh, but yeah, as far as, if it wasn't determined, then there would already be an infinite passage of time with an infinite number of universes that have been created, if it's in any way random.
So I would agree there. I think that my model is that there's a quantum field outside of space-time, and it's determined by its nature, and that's what created the universe. So I agree with
Hmm.
pretty much everything you've said there, but I'm not seeing the connection of why we would need or think a conscious choice would be a better explanation. Why think conscious choices, which are also determined, just like quantum fields, I think, are determined by their nature. Why think this is even a thing? Why think choices could be outside of space-time?
Well, for this, because of what I at least believe is the necessity. Now you don't, but I believe the necessity of an origin for the passage of time. So yeah, so it would be a determination that did that. It couldn't be something. It could not be a random process.
So I agree with that, but why think it was a choice and not just some other natural thing that was outside of space-time that determined it? Why does it have to be a mind choice and not just a natural phenomenon we haven't discovered yet that has no mind?
Well, if it were a natural phenomena, there we would be talking about it's something that had this random element, this small probability greater than zero of occurring. And if that has already happened, um, in anything that has a small probability greater than zero, that would just, and if even if, say, there was a tenseless entity, um, that is something that would have already happened an infinite amount of times, which is not logically possible.
How are choices different from that? Because choices seem to be the exact same, that whatever is going on in your brain to cause you to have a choice is going to be either determined by neurological structure, or it's going to be a bunch of electrical signals that aren't determined, and so they have a probability of making a choice. And so how are choices different than that? Because it seems like they suffer from the same problem.
Sure. Okay. So we'll go a little bit into neurology. So there are arguments that we are, we don't have any control over it. Now, I did mention a little bit, a little brief little section in my article where there's evidence that even though most of what we do is automation, we seem to have some type of ability to kind of like say no to some things. And we're not completely out of control of everything we do, that there is some ability for us to make decisions. Um, and and I mean, I didn't prep myself on reviewing what I know about neurology. That's my bad. I don't have it all off the top of my tongue. But definitely, there is evidence, that we're able to filter out some of the things that come up through neurology. I did. I cited one paper. It wasn't much on the 2021 paper that I wrote, but there is one little subsection on that I included. I didn't include any of this in the little blog series that I just put out this morning. But yeah, so there is some, there is a ability to make choices, and it's not just merely random. Like if we don't have any ability of free will at all, then yeah, everything is just an appearance of a choice and just merely random processes. Is that what you believe? That there's zero free will?
I'm a compatibilist, so I don't think there's any libertarian free will. I don't think free will is a new kind of thing. I think it
Hmm.
is followed, it's the exact same rules of physics as everything else. And so whatever
Hmm. Hmm.
is governing quantum fields or physics, which is either determined or random, must also govern
Yeah.
free will. And so I think that I've done quite a bit of research into neurology and our ability to say no to things. So if we have an idea or desire to do something, the ability to choose to not do so is just a different neurological process. So it doesn't seem to be outside of or apply some new kind of causal entity. It's just using a different part of the brain or a different kind of neurology to
Hmm.
counter the primary kind, which is giving you the idea in the first place. So, like Phineas Gage had the left frontal part of his cortex blown out by a giant metal rod, and he lost the ability to do that. And so it seems like I grant that we can have conflicting desires and then
Hmm.
choose one desire over the other desire, but that doesn't seem to imply that there's some new kind of causal entity in the universe that could act as a solution to the origin of the Big Bang. It just seems like one piece of neurology is countering a different piece of neurology, but that's all still the same, either deterministic or random forces.
Yes. No, I understand, your argument along those lines. Um, so now we do have now when I believe in libertarian free will, I believe there are a lot of restrictions. It's called some call it restricted free will. Van Engelen I agree with his view of it.
Van Inwagen,
Um,
that one, is that what
yeah,
you said?
if I mispronounced it, you um, go with your pronunciation. Um, so here, so if we disagree on any possibility of libertarian free will, then yeah, that does come into play um, with with the argument. So yeah, if I thought there was if I thought any type of libertarian choice was completely impossible or illusionary, and well, even if it was for humans, I still would believe that the entity. I believe was the supreme being, uh, made a decision that was not something that had to happen randomly, throughout all eternity. So again, yes, our different perspectives here definitely, make a difference as far as what we think is feasible. And it's a very loaded argument. I mean, I'm never going to be an expert um, in neurology. I'm a bit better. I'm not even well. I'm better at the philosophy of physics than I am in the philosophy of human neurology.
Well, the physics argument seems to be saying that nothing in physics can answer this question, therefore we need an alternative, which that part I agree with. I'm totally fine with that part of the argument. But the part that I think is incorrect is to go to it must be libertarian free will or this new kind of third causal entity of the universe. That part I think is a stretch. And so I think it'd be, even though I agree known physics can't solve this problem yet, the saying that there's an unknown new thing in physics that is very similar to the known physics is probably a better explanation to solve it than to posit this entirely new causal entity that I don't think there's any evidence for. Now, if we had already proven that free will existed in some kind, and it was already a thing in the universe, then yeah, we could say yes, it could be a potential explanation of the phenomenon. But I don't think we have. So it would be like kind of like saying a leprechaun did it. There's no evidence of leprechauns, and so you can't say leprechauns caused the Big Bang because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So, well, here though, there has to be something that was not a random event, according to my interpretation of the impossibility for an infinite passage of, and clearly tense time, not B theory or eternalism. There couldn't be something that randomly generated uh, the beginning of the universe, and I think that more leans towards consciousness than um, than a hypothetical quantum entity apart from space and
So
tense time.
So one thing would be in the randomness, I think I'd probably disagree because I think like given random decay of particles like uranium or whatever, random events can happen on an infinite spectrum. So we can say there is a quantum field that exists infinitely in the past. It can randomly decay at any point along that infinite spectrum. And so if we say the decay of this thing is the Big Bang or whatever, there's no reason to think that the point we exist in now, where the Big Bang happened 13.8 million years ago, is less likely to have been the point that this field would decay at than any other time. And so I don't see a problem with saying it was randomness. And secondly, I don't see why consciousness qualifies as a non-random, non-determined process. Or we could just say, because we could also just say the quantum field is determined. It was determined by its nature to do exactly this time and exactly no other time. And that would mean that you could solve the problem of what caused the Big Bang without consciousness and without randomness, and it'd still be a natural process.
All right. Well, I can at least address one of the points that you mentioned. So, as far as the decay argument you present, if we so if you look back at an infinite amount of time, no matter how far you go back, there's still an infinite amount of time before that. So there would have, no matter where you're at, infinite time has already occurred. So that decay process, you know, that you described, that would still fit under the randomness and already have happened, an infinite number of times in the past. Um, and all right, so I kind of focused on that one, and then could you repeat some of the other things? Because I didn't capture everything that you said after that.
Well, actually, I want to focus on that one. So let's say that there is a uh, probabilistic occurrence. This will happen once per infinity. And infinity is the set. And so even if there's been an infinite past of time, that includes the future too. And so if this could, there's a probability this decay will happen, but it's possible that it had never happened. There's a universe, a possible world where it never happens, and a possible world where it happens once, or a possible world where it happens twice. And so no matter how big you make the infinity, it doesn't seem to make a logical contradiction that a random event could cause any particular event at any particular point on the timeline, even if there is an infinite past. So it seems like that would only be a problem if it was entailed that this would necessarily happen given an infinite amount of time. And if that is not the case, if there's a possibility that it never happens, kind of like the gambler's fallacy argument that there's you spin a thing and it hits a number, you expect it to hit a different number the next time, which is just false. The probability of it happening on any single instant is the exact same as every other instant, and so there's a possibility it never happens. The same thing could apply to the determined collapse of whatever wave function to create the Big Bang. Since it's not necessarily going to happen, even given an infinite amount of time, it isn't necessarily entail that it would have happened in the past.
All right. Now, I would have to clearly see your probabilistic argument there. I don't think, there's a way to say that, there's something that might or might not happen, given an infinite set. So I'm a little familiar with, classical probability. And then, I literally worked out the probability of a monkey typing a Shakespearean sonnet in one of my papers. And I had a lot of fun with that. And I just used pretty much even broke it down to what's even high school classical, probability with a little bit added to it. I can't say I see.
Well, let me try to explain it.
Mhm.
So, like, imagine the monkeys on the typewriter thing.
Yeah.
The probability of the monkeys typing out the sonnets of Shakespeare is the exact same as the monkeys typing out R. Just the letter R every single time, no matter what.
Yeah.
It's a complete series of R. And if that happens, even given an infinite amount of time, if there's nothing but R's, then there's no Shakespeare. And so given the infinite amount of time that the monkeys have to type out those letters, there's one possible world where they typed nothing but R's. There's literally nothing but R's anywhere on the paper. And so there's an infinite past there, but they don't have every possibility that is instantiated in that. They literally have nothing but R's. And if this is a possibility, which it is, it's logically possible that this occurred, then there could likewise be a universe with an infinite past that has nothing but zeros or did not collapse, no instantiation of the Big Bang. And there could be one universe that has it at one point. So there's all R's, one J. There's one J in the entire series, and the probability of that happening was just one. It's going to entail one J and literally no more than one J. And so even if we have an infinite past of nothing but R's and one J, that one J could be anywhere along this timeline, and there's no logical contradiction here, and the J being the beginning of the universe. And so we could have a quantum field that has a deterministic property to be like the R's of never instantiating the collapse. And then there's a J at some point, and that one point could be anywhere along the spectrum.
All right. Well, that does, when you're talking about ultimately an infinite number of trials, each one of each scenario is going to have, its own probability. And yes, no matter, everything all R's versus, Shakespearean sonnet is going to have, one of them would at least have the exact same probability. I mean, any sequence, regardless of beautiful or gibberish, each individual one has the exact same probability. I don't, I still, I'd have, here's something where I'd really would want to, I'd have to get into like more of a writing to, like really carefully evaluating this calculation. It doesn't seem feasible that it's still ultimately, a random event, that you're describing. Each scenario is possible, but that doesn't in any way exclude, the other ones.
I'm not sure what you mean by exclude the other one. So, like, if one of the possibilities is there's literally nothing but R's, that would exclude Shakespeare's sonnet because there's only one of those is possible. There's a universe where there is Shakespeare's sonnet was typed out at some point, and a universe where it was literally nothing but R's. Those would be mutually exclusive infinites.
Right. Now, the thing, though, is when you're talking about, well, first of all, if the typing process, if it doesn't all happen at once, there's not going to be, an infinite series of typing. I mean, that would have to be, something that's all simultaneous, nothing sequential. And all right, but still, so there's now you're saying there's some quantum system that is programmed to so-called type indefinitely all R's, but with just one J.
Yeah,
Now,
and the J would be the Big
okay,
Bang. Yeah.
now that's still, now that type of programming, that would not be a random event. That would be a deterministic event.
Yep.
Like a Turing, or I forget the word, but yeah, that would definitely be something that's deterministic. And then that would be the only possibility there is. Yeah, so it's definitely not a random trial for sure.
Well, I mean, the nature of the quantum field would be deterministic, that it types R's and 1J. That's a determined quality of the field. But it's whether or not it selects J at any given point would be random. And so I agree that it can't be 100% random. That would make no sense. It would make no sense to say there's a literal 100% randomness of everything. And I guess even in that case, it could be, you could still end up with a bunch of R's and 1J. Even in that context, it would just be implausible. But I would prefer the one that is determined by its nature to do R's and 1J. But it wouldn't be a contradiction to say it was random, because even in that context, it's still possible with something where it's just everything is purely random to still end up with all R's and 1J.
All right, so there's this you're pretty much describing a finely tuned quantum system apart from space, that produces the sequence. Now, but also, though, well, okay, so it couldn't work as a process. I mean, it's something that, if we're going to talk about an infinite sequence, it's always been there. And then at some point that J, things just, there's vacuum energy, there's heat, the what we would see as, the very early universe. I mean, it is a hypothetical. I would even, even do more. When I get a totally new idea, I like to, do a little bit more analysis. But I mean, that seems plausible to you. But yeah, I don't. That doesn't at all seem realistic. I'd have to carefully crunch everything about that. But if you want to state that as a hypothetical, and that's the only possibility, I can't really absolutely disprove that. There's certain things that you can logically, by deduction, disprove. And then, of course, you got to agree on the premises. And then there's, things that are not actually subject to, deductive disproof.
Right. So I don't actually, I agree with you that there's some deterministic thing, but I was just going for the sake of argument, is it possible that it's purely random? And I think that it is. I think even if we have everything is purely random, you could still hypothetically get all R's and one J in one instance, as long as it's one of the has some probabilistic percent chance of occurring. But yeah, I tend to agree. I think there has to be some deterministic something or another, but I do think it's logically possible to have pure randomness do it also.
Well, there though, but if it's pure randomness, then you have this past infinite number of trials. I still don't see, I mean, you brought up a deterministic hypothetical model, but then now switching it back to randomness,
Well, couldn't the
that,
randomness have the same result? So if you have just random forces, no deterministic thing whatsoever, those random forces could end up to be exactly identical to all R's and one J just by happenstance, because that's one of the possibilities.
all right, well, if something, all right, so now I guess we're talking about randomness in the context of B theory or eternalism, which I don't even think makes a whole lot of sense to begin with. Um, but I guess if you posit it in the context of, oh, yeah, I still don't see how you're going to come up with a random model like this. But um, and I definitely like some things I gotta carefully sometimes look on paper, um, and then I can't just immediately always say, aha, that's why I disagree with this. But I don't necessarily see a random model, because if we're talking about randomness, then the randomness had a beginning of the typing, um, and the typing could, if there's any tense sequence, um, then that's going to have a beginning. If it's tenseless and uncaused, then that's something that just has always existed.
Gotcha.
So if you want to propose that it's something that just has always existed, um, then yeah, I can't really logically refute that model.
Well, we have been going for about an hour, and we have some questions from the audience, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Hillary's emails asks, what will the time be at the heat death of the universe, and will there be any time after that?
Okay. Oh, that is so far into the future. Um, Assuming there is heat death, well, the other option is that because of the expansion of the universe is getting faster, some think there could be a big rip, and I believe that would look like wormhole mouths opening up and shredding the universe. That's not as predictable. Hopefully, that's not going to happen. Heat death would be after all the stars have died. You could look up, models of stellar evolution on the internet, but that is very far off. I mean, our own sun, I think, has got about 5 billion years, and even before that, there'll be explosions that will completely evaporate, life on Earth, even the TARDIS, or where I forget what, the most hardy insects, well before heat death, life on Earth. Whether or not we're going to be able to have spaceships and deal with the problem of gravity in a spaceship and have any type of life, to avoid such a calamity, I, I can't make any predictions about that.
Gotcha. Next question is from Sebi. Who is the most intelligent writer you've ever read?
Um, well, uh, I've enjoyed Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose. I think they're two of the most brilliant physicists who have worked on making their ideas intelligible to the general public. Um, so I'll go with those two for now.
Gotcha. Tim West asked a similar question. Who is your favorite author other than the Bible?
Myself.
It's a good answer. I like it. Travis Statham asks, explain how the Bible could be naturally created without the influence of God, and is he aware that Yahweh is based off of Canaanite volcano deity?
Okay, well, I do know that, the terms Yahweh go back to Canaanite deities. I don't know about the volcano part of it. And I mean, yeah, I mean, if and then as the first part, if people just with active imaginations wrote the Bible, and then it just became as famous or well established in civilized world. Um, no, I don't agree with the this hardcore inerrancy, but I do believe there's definite truth within the Bible.
Gotcha. Salty Fox asks, how do you know the God of the Jews is the real God and the demiurge?
Okay, well, that's quite of a challenging question. Now, the reference to the word demiurge, that has different implications. Now, actually, Plato referred to the demiurge, but what we know as um, you know, actually, he wasn't close to what we know of as Platonic theology. Um, Now, I do believe that Jesus did fulfill. Jesus is the Christ, and I can't do this quickly, um, but I do believe his looking at the scripture and his reinterpretation of it, makes a lot of sense to me. And I've had very powerful experiences of healing. I made a lot of mistakes back in the 1970s and early 80s, and and God had, I believe, my recovery was enhanced by my cooperation, with God.
And demiurge just means the creator of the universe, right? Is there something else, some other context there?
Okay, so, well, one of them, so okay, so one guy in the first or in the second century claimed that, oh, the God of the Old Testament has nothing to do with Jesus Christ, and then referred to was, and the God of the Old Testament is not the creator of the universe, and the demiurge, was some type of material being. There's a lot to it. I can't quickly answer all this off the top of my head quickly.
Gotcha. All right. I think that's it for the questions. We have been going for a little over an hour. Really appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work? And the link to our blog is in the description for anybody interested in looking at through cosmological argument.
Thank you. Yeah. So my blog is called Theo Perspectives, and it's a free one, Theo Perspectives at blogspot.com. Just look up James Goetz and Theo Perspectives, and you'll see a lot of my stuff. Also, I have a profile on Phil Papers, as far as my academic work is concerned.
Cool. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, and I hope everybody enjoys their Thanksgiving holiday. Take care. Thank you.